Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for making the time to join us for this workshop today. Excited to talk a little bit about what it means to champion a family-centered education system. Particularly in today's workshop, we are going to be looking at what is the critical link of the foundation of family engagement to learning in early years and primary. We're going to listen to and hear from our wonderful colleagues from South Africa and Sierra Leone, share how family engagement is situated in their contexts and communities. We're then going to listen to them share about how they are working to shift power dynamics, to encourage more listening, two-way communication, and trust between families and schools, and to help schools recognize families as critical partners and champions of their students' learning, well-being, and development. We're then going to move into an interactive activity where we're going to listen from you about the different approaches that you've been using and some recommendations that you have to promote more listening and understanding between families and schools. So we're going to start off with a short presentation from both of our teams, and then we're going to hand over to you for an interactive activity. So without any further ado, let me hand over to our amazing facilitators to introduce themselves. Miriam, can I call on you to get us started, please?
And good afternoon from Sierra Leone. My name is Dr. Miriam Mason-Cisse, and I'm the Country Director for EducAid Sierra Leone.
Alpha, can I call on you to introduce yourself, please?
Good day, everybody. Alpha Dibangwa is my name. I am from Sierra Leone. I'm the Acting Director for School Quality Assurance Management and Resources, Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education.
Thank you, Alpha. Karen, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Ross from Mikhulu Trust and based in South Africa.
Thank you. Fode, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fode Kaloko. I work with EducAid Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Fode, and Katima.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katima Ibrahim. I'm from Mikhulu Trust, South Africa.
This is the incredible organizations that they represent. EducAid is an educational network of free schools in Sierra Leone. EducAid works to serve the diverse needs of communities and teachers to improve education quality, social inclusion, gender equality, and community resilience. With in-depth understanding of specific contexts arising in Sierra Leone, EducAid uses local knowledge, skills, relationships, and experience to raise the standard of education for as many children as possible across the country. Mikhulu Child Development Trust works at the intersection of parental support, early childhood development, and violence risk mitigation, and designs systemic approaches to implementing these programs by working with government and nonprofit organizations. The work of Mikhulu Trust results in nurturing parent-child relationships and improved cognitive and social emotional development of children. I'm going to now hand to Karen and Katima to share a little bit about the context of Sierra Leone, of South Africa.
Thanks, Risha. I'm delighted to be here today to share findings from our work in South Africa. While the global synthesis examined engagement across primary and secondary schools in multiple countries, our research focused specifically on early childhood development centers, a sector that operates quite differently from formal schooling systems in many countries, in many contexts. What I want to share with you today is how family engagement plays out in a fragmented ECD system and what we've learned about building partnerships that are genuinely responsive to the realities families and educators face every day. So let me start with a quick snapshot of the South African early childhood landscape. South Africa has a population of approximately 64 million and a very young population structure, with about a third of our citizens under 18. So decisions about early childhood really affect a large proportion of families. Compulsory education begins only at grade R, which is 1 year before first grade and around 6 years old, and continues to grade 9. Although grade R is part of the schooling system in policy, in practice it's delivered through a mix of public schools and a large number of private and community ECD centers. So we don't yet have a fully standardized, publicly provided grade R experience. More importantly for this conversation, there's no compulsory or universal ECD provision for children aged 0 to 5. And this sector is highly fragmented, with provision heavily dependent on NGOs, community organizations, and private centers. And by the time children reach age 10, our literacy outcomes reflect the consequences of this early fragmentation. Based on the latest PEARLS assessment, about 81% of grade 4 learners in South Africa cannot read for meaning. This statistic is not a reflection of children's abilities, but reflects the system that they experience. It's a reminder of why strong early family engagement and quality early learning opportunities really matter. It's also important to acknowledge one more aspect of context. In many of the areas where we work, families value ECD centers not only for learning, but because they provide a predictable, safe place for their children during the day. That sense of safety forms part of the foundation for trust between families and educators. If we could change slides, thanks, Risha. In 2022, South Africa made an important structural shift when the Early Childhood Development function moved from the Department of Social Development to the Department of Basic Education. In principle, this is a major step forward. It signals recognition that early learning is part of the education system and not an add-on. But the practical reality is that the system is still far from universal. Infrastructure is inconsistent, training and support vary widely, and many center owners and educators rely heavily on NGOs for professional development, resources, and ongoing coaching. So while the policy shift is significant, it hasn't yet translated into a coherent nationwide ECD system. Families often experience this fragmentation directly. Different quality, different expectations, and very different forms of engagement depending on which centers they access. This is the backdrop for our research and for the findings we want to share today. Next slide. Turning to our research sample, we worked primarily with families, educators, and center leaders connected to the communities where Mikhulu Trust operates. The demographic picture is important here. Many families live in contexts where meeting basic needs is a daily priority, and that shapes the way they're able to engage with centers. What we saw in the data is that parents and caregivers often have limited time, limited flexibility, and sometimes limited access to information from centers. At the same time, educators are operating within tight budgets, small teams, and enormous responsibility. I want to emphasize this because it's easy to interpret low engagement as a lack of interest, but what we found was quite the opposite. Parents care deeply about their children's learning. What they often lack is not motivation, but the practical means, time off work, transport costs to attend meetings, or simply knowing what's happening inside the center each day. These demographic realities are not incidental. They influence how parents show up, how educators anticipate engagement, and how centers organize themselves. When we look at the findings, it's essential to understand the socioeconomic context that sits beneath them. Next slide. One of the clearest findings in South Africa is that we don't have a consistent national standard for what family engagement in ECD should look like. Without that guidance, center leaders often become the de facto gatekeepers. They decide when, how, and to what extent families should be involved. What this yields in practice is an emphasis on single event-based engagement, so the open day or the concert or the parent meeting, rather than an ongoing relationship building. And when families do engage one-on-one, it's often for transactional reasons, fees, fundraising, or administrative issues. What's missing in many cases is engagement that supports learning at home, helping parents know what their children are doing in class, what play-based learning looks like, or how they can weave simple storytelling, book sharing, and conversation into daily routines. This doesn't mean that centers are unwilling or that parents are uninterested. It means that the system has not created the conditions, the time, or the tools for sustained partnership. That distinction is important because what we saw in our work is that families genuinely want to do more and educators want better ways to connect. So while the policy shift is significant, families' lived experience of ECD is still deeply shaped by context, inequality, and exposure to violence. Next slide. One of the encouraging findings from South Africa is that trust levels between families and ECD educators are generally high and noticeably higher than what the global research found in primary and secondary settings. Parents often express strong confidence in educators, especially in the early years where relationships feel more personal. But we also found that much of this trust is passive. Parents trust the educators because they know best, and educators often interpret this deference as disengagement. Passive trust is comfortable, but it doesn't build partnership. It can unintentionally reinforce the idea that learning happens only at the center, not through everyday interactions at home. Let me give you a concrete example. We met one mother who said that she never questioned what happened at the center because the educators are trained. What would I know? But when we introduced dialogic book sharing activities that she could do at home, she told us later, I didn't realize I was already teaching my child when we talk about what we see on the way to the shops and to school. That shift from deference to confidence is what active trust looks like. Our opportunity, and really our responsibility, is to convert passive trust into active collaboration. That means inviting parents into conversations, giving them simple tools, and helping educators validate parents' knowledge of their children. When trust becomes active, everything changes. Home and center start to work together, not in parallel. Next slide, please. So what does a family-friendly ECD center look like? Our findings point to a reciprocal relationship. On the educator's side, it begins with empathy, understanding the realities families face and communicating in ways that are simple, respectful, and culturally appropriate. It also includes giving parents practical, tangible ideas, how to support play at home, what songs or stories they can repeat, and how everyday activities like cooking, bathing, cleaning can be moments of learning. On the family side, parents benefit enormously from knowing what children do during the day, how the classroom is set up, and what it costs, both financially and emotionally, to run an ECD center well. That insight shifts the dynamic from consumer to partner. When both sides move towards each other in these small ways, the outcome is profound. Children benefit from consistent routines, a shared approach to language and play, and a sense of coherence between home and center. Partnership doesn't require grand interventions. It requires simple, repeated relational actions. Next slide, please. So to close, let me touch on the practical levers that our work and the global synthesis suggest are most effective in strengthening family-centered partnerships. First, centers need simple, adaptable tools, checklists, sample messages to parents, guidance on conversation starters, and low-cost activities families can do at home. These tools demystify engagement and make it manageable. Secondly, educators need ongoing mentorship, not just one-off workshops. Change happens when someone walks alongside an educator, helping them embed new habits into daily practice. Third, our experience with dialogic book sharing shows the power of low-cost, high-impact tools. Wordless books and shared storytelling give parents concrete behaviors they can immediately use at home, regardless of their literacy levels. They support language development, attention, and connection. And these activities are enjoyable both for parents and children, and they work equally well in classroom settings. And finally, we can't ignore the role of psychosocial well-being. Access to social work support for parents and for staff is essential. Stress at home, in the community, or in the center quickly undermines the relationship needed for engagement. South Africa experiences high levels of violence, and many of these ECD centers are in violence hotspots. These levers are affordable, scalable, and grounded in lived experience. Most importantly, they build equity into the system by giving families tools that they can use now without waiting for major structural reform. What we've learned through this research is that meaningful family engagement in early childhood development isn't about getting parents to do more. It's about creating the conditions for partnership. It's about recognizing that parents are their children's first educators and that centers can amplify, not replace, what happens in the home. The work ahead requires us to design systems and supports that are responsive to families' lived realities, their constraints, their strengths, and their aspirations. When we do that, we don't just improve engagement, we transform outcomes for children. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Fode and Miriam to share us a little bit about the context in Sierra Leone. Handing to you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to start by explaining the education system in Sierra Leone. The education system in Sierra Leone is organized in 3 levels. We have the Central Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education. We have 16 district education offices, and we have more than 13,000 schools across the country. Another important point is that while there is some provision for early childhood education, it is not yet a mandatory thing in Sierra Leone. Also, even though family engagement is recognized in the national policy, the rules focus more on being informed about children's rights or participation in school management committees rather than supporting learning at home. So in summary, the school system recognizes families, but their role is not yet clearly centered on learning supports. Now, moving on to what we found in our research. Yes, thank you. So we surveyed and held conversations with diverse groups of families, educators, and some students. To add a bit of context, we examined gender breakdowns and educators levels of difference for us to understand the different range of experiences that are represented in the study. So this background helps us to interpret the findings with greater accuracy. Now, with that foundation, let us move on to what we discovered about family engagement in practice. Next slide. Here, we begin to see some of the core findings. So what is important to note is that family engagement practices vary widely from one community and school to another. In addition to that, there is clear perception gap about family engagement in Sierra Leone. So for us here in Sierra Leone, educators tend to see family engagement as participation in school management committees, while families see it as supporting learning at home. As a result, families often feel unsure about how to help their children because they lack guidance and may be facing challenges such as poverty, time constraints, and their limited schooling experiences. Next slide. Okay. So let us look at some of the challenges that we got from the research. So first, there are strong power dynamics between families and schools. Many parents simply hand over their authorities to school, believing that the school knows best. However, this creates a gap where families feel disconnected or even intimidated. Another challenge is that families often fear being asked for donations, so they avoid school meetings altogether. So in addition to that, some school management committees tend to include only families who are already confident or connected, leaving out many other families. And what is critical is the link between low student engagement and family engagement. When families are not involved, students are less likely to attend, participate, or see school as a priority. All right, thank you. Over to Miriam.
Thank you. So we're in a context of about 9 million, population of about 9 million. Only very recently has education been made freely available from primary to the end of secondary. And there's the percentage of the population that are educated is very small. So quite a lot of families have felt that distance. So we found that if we shifted our mindset from hard to reach families to hard to reach schools, and we started doing the moving and taking it that the onus was not on the family to come to the educator, but the onus should be of the educators to actually reach out to families. That made an important difference in how we could get more of those who are often left out of the conversation. We try and in the same light, if we're not making people come, we're saying where's a more appropriate venue for you. The same thing about timings for school meetings. So not saying we want you there at 10 o'clock when they're a, low income family that need to be out selling in the market, or they need to be out in the farm. But actually saying, okay, what times work for you? Okay, how about we have a 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock evening meeting, that sort of thing, or do we need to put it on the weekend, so that we're not creating barriers and, as Karen was saying, assuming that people's failure to turn up is ill will or lack of concern, and realizing that it's actually, they need to be out and earning. Another way that we found was more sort of respectful of where people were and enabled us to work differently with families was where we used tools that were accessible to the people we were talking to. So the School Management Committee and the CTA guideline was 16 pages of small print, a handbook that 98% of the SMCs would not be able to read. So we created an icon checklist, and it was just 13 images of things that you as an SMC can take responsibility for. And it was like the most impactful 2.5 hours when we actually engaged families in that way. Also, now we tend to ask parents, what are your priorities for your children's education? And we ask that with a bunch of images that they can then move around and create their own priority list that we can then engage over. I love this Brookings diagram that's showing on the screen at the moment, because we thought we were doing a great job because we were going out and telling the communities what we were doing. And then we realized, oh my God, we're leading, we're telling them, we're still the sage on the stage. And that flip has been vital to start with listening. So we sort of make a big thing about we're having listening engagement meetings, listening to what the parents and the families want for their children's education, and then we can co-create it together. Next slide, please. So yes, just digging in a little bit on that, the sort of levers for change being those tools that are easily understandable, visible, visual. Yeah, we've got little explanation if you want it, if you can read it, but that mother's conversation starter is to say, yeah, you may not be able to read and write, but it doesn't mean you can't ask your child about her friendships at school, her relationships at school, who was there on time, showing that you care about people being there on time. I don't need to be able to read to see an exercise book has never seen a red pen. You know, and I can ask about what that red pen's been doing, and if it's X's instead of, we had one of our DDs previously, he would talk about how his mother could see that there was a go-go, and that's what's used to pull down the branch when you're picking your mangoes. And if there were lots of go-go's, that was a good thing. And if there were X's, he was in trouble, and so on. So you don't have to be literate to be able to engage with it, but you need access points. So this tool was one that created an opportunity for mothers who are often the least confident in that conversation about education to engage. As I said, making sure we are putting ourselves in a position to be able to listen. And we are just starting some student-led conversations and research to understand from their side what are the reasons for our chronic absenteeism. It's around 50% nationwide, and how we can break that down, listening to families, listening to students, and really supporting the schools to not feel too threatened to be able to do that by sort of being able to do some adjustment of those power imbalances that so often exist. Thank you.